All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Cultivating Character. Welcome back, I should say. We're continuing our discussion, our weekly discussion in how to cultivate character, how to work on ourselves to be better people. And we're taking these teachings from Ethics of Our Fathers, from possibly one of the oldest books of guidance, of ethics, of morals, from the Tanaic period, which brings us back a couple thousand years ago. And today we're talking about a very important discussion, a very important topic. We're talking about relationships and about love and relationships, which is something which is talked about all over. We are all very well educated about love and relationships. But we're going to see a different perspective here, a deeper perspective, a more real and long-lasting perspective. We're having this class on a very appropriate day. Today is a Jewish holiday, a lesser-known holiday, but a Jewish holiday nonetheless, the holiday of Lag BaOmer, which one of the things that are being celebrated is the life of Rabbi Akiva, who was one of the scholars and teachers in the Tanaic period. He actually is one of the authors in Ethics of Our Fathers, one of the many. And he was well known for emphasizing, for focusing on the mitzvah of loving your fellow as yourself. He would teach that this is a fundamental principle in the Torah. One of the most important values of Torah is just that, loving our fellow as ourselves. So talking about love and relationships today is very appropriate. Now, we all get an education about love. We get it from TV, from the movies, from Hollywood, from music. And, between all these places, we kind of get one theme that runs across love, when you think about love. And that message is that love means I feel good when I'm around you. If being with you makes me feel good, then it's love. And the problem with that is that it's about me and about how I feel. And it kind of depends on the other person giving me that. So as long as they're giving me what I need or what I want, then the relationship is fine. But as soon as that cause, that dependency goes away, then the love just falls apart. And unfortunately, it's a very common narrative in relationships that it starts off with passion because something about the two people draw them close. But then that thing can change and people change. And when the things change, then the relationship falls apart. So part of what we want to talk about today is how is it possible to have lasting love, lasting relationships that outlast their reasons. Hence the name Unreasonable Love, because we want love that's, at least it's not defined by and limited to reasons. So take a look at this text. If you don't have the text in front of you, you can get it at chabadkibi.com/unreasonable love. I'll post it here in the chat. Let me do it quickly. All right, there it is. Okay, so there it's in the chat. chabadkibi.com/unreasonable love. It's not imperative that you have the text. It's really not. It's just a few short ones, and I'll read them. So if you're driving or jogging or doing something else, just continue what you're doing. So text number 1 is from Ethics of Our Fathers. It's from chapter 5. This is basically the main thing we're focusing on today, this text. Here goes. Any love that is dependent on something, when the thing ceases, the love also ceases. But a love that is not dependent on anything never ceases. Yeah, so far so good. It's pretty simple. When the love depends on something, then it depends on something. And when that thing is gone, then the love is gone. When a love is not dependent on anything, then nothing will ever stop it. It will continue forever, for eternity. The passage continues, which is a love that is dependent on something. We bring a historical example for both. The love of Amnon for Tamar is a love that depends on something. And one that is not dependent on anything is the love of David and Jonathan. Those are two stories from scripture from the book of Samuel. They both occurred in David's lifetime. And let's look at these two stories. The first story is with Amnon and Tamar. Amnon and Tamar were both children of David. They had different mothers. They were from different marriages. So they were half siblings. Now, it's not a very beautiful story, but it's a story. Amnon was very attracted to his half-sister. She was apparently very beautiful, and he was very strongly attracted to her. And so he actually connived a plan, and he pretended he was sick, and he asked someone to ask her to bring him food. And then when she came into his room, it was just the two of them alone, so he raped her. And he was punished for that. He was actually killed for that. And they also passed new legislation to prevent this situation from reoccurring. It was treated very, as it deserved to be treated. But it happened. And what's interesting is that after he satisfied his desire with her, the verse says that he hated her with a great hatred, greater than the love he had loved her. He initially had a very strong love for her, not a very noble love, but he was very attracted to her. He had a strong love for her. But as soon as he was finished with that, as soon as that lust, that passionate desire went away because of the reason was gone, then the entire relationship collapsed and he hated her, which is an extreme example, but it's an example of what happens when the cause of the love of a love that's dependent on something. So when the cause goes away, this is what happens. Now the second example, the example for a love that's not dependent on anything and that is long lasting, is a very different relationship, much more noble and respectable. It's the friendship of Jonathan and David. Jonathan was the son of King Saul. King Saul was David's predecessor. Now, King Saul wanted very strongly for the kingship to remain in his family. And the next king in that line would have been his son Jonathan. The person who was threatening to take over the throne was David. David had been asked by the prophet Samuel to be the future king, and Saul saw that as a threat. He saw that correctly as a threat. And Saul was trying to kill David because David was threatening his kingship. The very last person you would expect to be David's friend would be Jonathan. Jonathan is the one who has everything to lose from David's success and nothing to gain. Yet, Jonathan loved David. He saved his life. He didn't save his life once. He saved his life numerous times. It was because it was a love that came from within. The verse says that Jonathan's soul became bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own self. So that's an example in the other extreme, where there's a love that's not dependent on anything. Nothing about nothing about what David had to offer Jonathan was drawing him close. It was just an altruistic, selfless love. So that's the passage in the Mishnah. We have these two extremes, and we're going to try to unpack this a little bit, try to get more clarity about what exactly it means to have a love that's not dependent on anything, and what are the benefits of that love, and how it's possible to attain. So let's start with a story, an interesting story. You may remember last week we mentioned Rabbi Zusha from Annapolis. He was a well-known teacher, a well-known rabbi, a well-known scholar. He was a very holy, saintly person. He was a community leader. And he actually had a brother, Elimelech, who was also of similar stature. And Elimelech and Zusha would, before they became famous, before they became well-known, they would wander around from town to town, disguised as simple beggars. And they would travel from place to place. So one evening they arrived in a town. The town was called Ludmir. No worries if you haven't heard of it. Neither did I until I read the story. They came to Ludmir, and they see a lighted window and a large, beautiful home. So they're looking for a place to stay. They knock on the door. They say, would it be okay if we can stay here tonight? But the resident, the owner, was not very friendly at all. He said, I don't run a hotel. There's a poorhouse near the synagogue. You can try over there, but this is not for you. And he closed the door. So they walked away, and they went to another home, and they came to a much smaller home. And the much less well-to-do, but nicer, kinder family welcomed him in. And this man and his wife invited these two brothers to be their guests in their humble hut. And they put whatever resources they have at their disposal. They were very hospitable. Now, years later, these two brothers are again visiting Ludmir. And this time, they're the official guests of the community. They had come to teach the community. They were very venerable, respectful guests. And actually, the town council had a whole discussion who would have the merit of hosting these honorable guests. And sure enough, the wealthy man who was our character in the early part of the story, who had initially refused them to stay, he was given the honor of hosting them. Now, he didn't know it was the same people. He goes over to them and says, it's my honor to host you. I'm having you in my home. I already told your coachman to bring your wagons and your suitcases to my place. But after a few hours, the coachman's there and all the luggage is there, but the two brothers are not there. And the host is getting anxious, and after some time passes, he goes to the coachman. He says, do you by any chance know where they are? And the coachman looks at him and says, oh, they're not staying here. They asked me to come here with the coaches and the suitcases, but they're actually staying at a small hut further down inside the town. And the owner, the host, immediately goes to this small hut, and sure enough, he sees these brothers having a tea with their host. So he says, why do you do this? What happened? What's going on? Why didn't you stay with me? So they said, well, you kind of are hosting us. You're hosting the part of us that you wanted. Because last time we were here, we didn't have a coach. We didn't have horses. We didn't have a coachman. We didn't have the changes of clean pressed clothes in our luggage. And you turned us away. So we figured that what you want is our coachman, our horses, our luggage. And those you have. You just don't have the part you didn't want, which is us. So obviously they were teaching him a lesson. They were teaching him a lesson that they preferred the love without reason. The love of the hospitality, the kindness, the friendship of this person who invited them initially just because he was being kind, just because he cared about them, not because of the prestige and honor they could bring to him. Whereas this wealthy person had desired them only for something they could bring to him. That's a story where we kind of see that point. And what we're realizing is that a love that's based on things are dependent on things. And when the things go, the love goes. The relationship is dependent on that. Now, there's also a deeper problem. Besides for the fact that it can't last, or it might not last, it probably won't last, it eventually won't last. Besides for that issue, there's also a deeper problem. It's that if you love me because of what I offer you, if two people are in a relationship because they're, so to say, mutually exploiting each other, they're each agreeing to take advantage of each other and let the other one reap benefits of whatever they can offer in exchange for each other. If that's what's happening, and you don't love the person, there's no relationship here. You don't love me. You love yourself. It's just that I can help you enjoy yourself. There's a story, an untrue story. Well, it's a true story, but it never happened. A story of a salmon fish that was living in the sea. And there were thousands of other fish just like him. Didn't feel very special. Didn't feel very loved. Was longing to be someone important. And then, sure enough, one day he overhears from just above the surface of the water, there's a big boat. And what are they saying? The king loves salmon. Wow, how honorable. The king of the entire country loves me and wants me. And sure enough, this lucky salmon finds himself in the net of the fisherman, and he's being brought onto this boat, the king's boat. And the whole time, the whole way back, as he's swimming in his little tub of water over there, he hears, wow, what a beautiful fish. The king is going to love this salmon. The king loves salmon. This fish is beautiful. And this salmon is so excited. Comes to the palace, make a long story short, because you get the idea. And he hears the king say, wow, what a beautiful salmon. I love salmon. But sure enough, the king says, would you please cut it open and fillet it and put it on the grill? And then the salmon realized the king didn't love salmon. The king loved himself. The salmon makes the king feel good. So a love that's dependent on something, a love that's, like we said, mutual exploitation, that each of the two parties are together taking advantage of each other or letting each other make them feel good. So then even if both sides feel very good and they're very lucky and happy to have each other, I'm happy to have you to make me feel good and vice versa. But at the end of the day, there's only one love, and that's each party loves themselves. And the other person is merely just an ingredient in helping them feel good. So it's not a real love. Now, a lot of relationships that we have in our lives are going to be, and they're supposed to be, dependent on things. You don't go to a store and buy a product there for no reason. You buy it because the product is suitable and it's a good price and it fits your needs. And as soon as the product doesn't fit your needs, then you're not going to go back there and buy it again for some essential, deep reason that has nothing to do with what you need. That would be ridiculous. That would be, unreasonable in another way. So obviously, many of our relationships, all of our relationships, have that element. And even, some of the, let's say the most deep relationship possible is perhaps a husband and wife, a marriage where there's real commitment and real unity, become one family. Even there, it starts off with a love that's dependent. Nobody goes dating and finding a wife or a husband because of the fact that they can give to them unconditionally. They're looking for the fact that the other person complements them and suits their needs, and together they fill each other in. Whatever the person's looking for, it's something that's, filling their own agenda. But I guess there's 2 points we could say here. The first point is that there can be deeper elements to a relationship. There can be, and there should be, there must be, we can demand from ourselves that there should be a connection with other people that doesn't depend. It's not because of the services they offer, not because of their looks or their money or their fame or any other thing, but just because of a commitment, a connection between two people that's deeper than that. And another element is that even in a relationship, which is dependent, so you're going to a store to buy carrots. Your relationship with the store owner is because they have carrots and you need carrots, and he wants money and you have money, and you exchange your money for his carrots. Pretty simple relationship. There's nothing essential here. And if he stops providing carrots or the carrots are moldy, you're not going back there and buying more carrots, and that's perfectly fine. But besides for this person having carrots, he's also a person. He has a life. He has value, an essential value that's far deeper than the service that he provides for you. So even in this, very utilitarian relationship, there can be a deeper element. And as time passes, you can hope from yourself that you'll get to know this person and care about this person, not necessarily to be their best friend, but to recognize the fact and respect the fact that this person has a value that goes far beyond the services that they are for you, and to connect to that. To connect to that, if two people can connect on that basis, on that premise, that we both have something far deeper, greater, and more important than what we offer each other in the other, what we can offer benefit and pleasure and services to each other. Now, taking this one step further, the same idea also applies between us and God. The relationship between a person and our Creator in a lot of ways emulates an ideal relationship between people. Sometimes the relationship between God and us is called marriage, because there's also this commitment here. And we're taught the same idea, that God's love for each person is not dependent on anything. It doesn't depend on our behavior. It doesn't depend on our skills, our achievements, our capabilities. It's just because of who we are. And if anyone can see who we really are, it's God, our Creator. So there's a relationship here between God and each person that is absolutely independent of anything. It's just because God chose to establish that relationship. And that's very important, very empowering, because it doesn't matter what happened 5 minutes ago. It doesn't, whatever I did 5 minutes ago doesn't take away one iota from this relationship. And that's empowering, because at any moment we can always restore and refocus on this relationship. And the Maharal is Rabbi Yehuda Lau from Prague, most famous for the Golem, which has become a big part of Jewish literature. Anyway, the Maharal was a big Torah scholar, and he taught a very interesting insight. In the Torah, we have a number of well-known personalities of righteous people who are discussed in the Torah, and the stories of their lives are discussed. Now, by most of them, they have a little bit of an intro, a little bit of a bio before they're brought in. For example, by Noach, who of course survived the flood and was the most righteous in his generation. So before the Torah says any stories about him, the Torah says Noach was a righteous man, Noach was the most righteous in his generation, etc. By Moses, before he becomes the guy who takes the Jews out of Egypt, we're taught that he was a shepherd and he took care of even the very little sheep who needed him. And there's the revelation at the burning bush, which was again bringing out his leadership qualities. So Moses is introduced as being someone before anything happens. But Abraham, the Torah doesn't say a word about his life and achievements before he's spoken to by God. The very first thing in the Torah about Abraham is that God spoke to him and established this covenant with him. So the Maharal explains, of course, Abraham had plenty of good qualities. We know that. But the Torah wants to emphasize that the relationship God was creating with Abraham, who was the first Jew, and setting the tone for the Jewish message for all of eternity, is the relationship is not a love that depends on anything. If Abraham were to have been chosen because of his wisdom, courage, kindness, self-sacrifice, whatever, then our special relationship with God would have been seen as dependent on us also sharing these qualities. It would imply that it's a love that depends on something, and like the passage we read earlier, that when the thing ceases, the love also ceases. That if we were to cease to be worthy of God's choice, then the love would also cease, God forbid. And that, the Maharal explains, is the Torah's emphasis, that God's love for us is not dependent on anything. It's therefore eternal. It's unequivocal. It's just because. It's like we're saying an unreasonable love. Now, the same thing also applies in reverse direction, from us to God. Ideally, ultimately, our love for God should be also a love that's not dependent on anything. We should be doing what we know is good and right and true, not for any benefit it can bring us, but just because it is the truth. And let's take a look at text number 2. It's from Maimonides. If you have the text in front of you, follow along. If you don't, no worries. You'll just hear me read it. It's a text from Maimonides, and he says as follows. One who serves God out of love fulfills the Torah and the mitzvahs and follows in the path of wisdom for no reason in the world, not out of fear that something bad will happen to them, nor in order to acquire benefit. Rather, one does the truth because it is true, And ultimately, good will also come because of it. But the reason is not because of the good. Now I'm already done quoting. It's because this is true. So the ideal, and of course this is an ideal because it's a challenge to see so far beneath the surface. But the ideal in terms of our relationship with God is that we do what we know is good, what we know is true and right, not for any other reason other than because it's true. So now we have to balance that because if you take this to too much of an extreme, then what you might end up with is the thought process that, okay, so if I'm doing things for non-altruistic motives, for ulterior motives, for non-authentic motives, then maybe I should take a pause and stop doing them until I can refocus. And of course, that's not good. You never want to stop doing good things because of your motives. You want to always be doing more and more good and work on the motives independently. And that's this final text over here, text 3. It's from the Talmud in Biscayne. And the Talmud says as follows: a person should always occupy themselves with the Torah and the mitzvahs, even if it is not for its own sake. In other words, it's for an ulterior motive. Why? Because for doing it not for its own sake, one comes to do it for its own sake. Keep the actions going. And there's a few points here. First of all, the action matters. The action matters. If somebody's going to be giving charity and they're doing it for ulterior motives, I give $10 to this poor person because I get such a rush when the guy says, thank you so much, you bought me lunch. I feel so good about myself. I go back to work after lunch feeling energized, invigorated, with adrenaline pumping through my skin, with that great feeling of I just did someone a great favor. I feel like such a good person. It gives meaning to my life. That's not for him. It's for me. I'm giving the money, absolutely for my own motives. So I might say, okay, so let me cut back the charity until I can get more legit. That's not the right approach because the action matters. This guy needs the charity, or any other mitzvah for that matter. Someone's going to stop lighting Shabbos candles because they're doing it only because their mom did it and it's not for sincere motives. Listen, we have to keep the mitzvahs going, keep the good deeds going because the deed matters. And we shouldn't stop the deed because of our motives. We can continue to work on the motives, but the deed has to continue. The second point here is that doing the action for ulterior motives actually will bring and help develop into a more authentic commitment. Just how it works, that when we do the right thing, with time, we start doing it for a more authentic reason. And the same thing applies if you go back to the interpersonal relationships. Every relationship starts off with reasons. But what we hope for and what we can demand from ourselves is that as time passes, we can solidify and deepen the relationship, to dig deeper into it, and to reveal a more true, everlasting, unconditional love that's beneath the surface. And it takes time, it takes effort, but you don't want to stop doing good things until you get there, because that won't help. But this actually came up as a question, a halacha question, a question in Jewish law. It came up to the Rashba. Rashba was a 13th century Jewish scholar, leader in Spain. He was actually very successful. He was a doctor, he was a lawyer, he was a judge, he had a large family. He was well known for being a time management expert. It's written about him that he would go for a walk every single day, even with all these other responsibilities. And he managed to be so focused that even during his walk, he didn't think about anything else. Not about his medicine or his business or his law. He was very present and calm. Anyway, so the Rasha was asked the question. He was asked that there's a certain individual who owns a beautiful building, and he wanted to dedicate this building as a sanctuary for the synagogue, all at his own expense. Very noble. But this person wants to inscribe his name at the entrance to the sanctuary as a testimony for his donation. And there were people in the congregation that objected to it. So they asked the Rashba, what do you say? The Rashba said that actually in our own community, he writes, we do the same thing. And the reason is because it encourages more giving, it encourages more philanthropy, it nurtures that culture, and that's the main thing. That's the main thing. And of course, people can choose to be as noble as they desire, but we want to encourage the deed, because the deed is of paramount importance. So we don't want to, we're trying to balance these two things. On the one hand, we have to recognize the fact that ideal relationships, both interpersonal and between us and God, are non-dependent on anything. At the same time, we don't want to cut back on good things, on good deeds, because of a lack of motivation, a lack of true motivation. Now, there's one more point that's very important here. And that last point is that deep down, we're good people. And that means that deep down, when we do something good, it's coming from a good place. It really is. It's coming from a good place. When you're giving that $10 to the poor person, even though you feel good and even though it makes you excited and makes you whatever other benefits you have from it, deep down, you're doing it because it's the right thing and because you're a good person. And that's true about all of us. We're each good people, and deep down, beneath the surface, perhaps beneath several surfaces, but deep down under all the layers, it's coming from a true, good, pure place. And therefore, essentially, this action is a good action. So, of course, we want to work on removing the layers and identifying more with that altruistic motive. But it's not as if we're essentially selfish and this act is selfish and there's nothing truly good and altruistic about it. That's not true. The truth is that deep down, we're all doing it for the very right reasons. So let's just summarize what we talked about today so we walk away with a clear picture. We talked about the difference between love that depends on something and love that does not depend on anything. We gave a couple examples of that. We talked about the fact that the message that we get about love from all of our surroundings without thinking deeply into it is the message of love is I feel good when I'm with you. And the problem with that is that, first of all, it can change and it will change. It does change. And second of all, that even if it lasts, it's not true love. You're not loving the other person, you're loving yourself. And we talked about how there can be and must be a deeper relationship, which is through commitment, through two people committing to take a relationship deeper than just the surface or face value, just the mutual benefits. And second of all, through respecting and honoring and thinking about the essential qualities and value that each person has. And the next point we made was that the same idea also exists between us and God. That God loves us and cares about us without any conditions. That was evident in his choice of Abraham, the first Jew. Also, the same with us to God. Our ideal relationship is one that's entirely unconditional. And the last point we made was that we still should be doing good deeds, even if we're not yet motivated in the most ideal manner. And that's because A, the deed matters. The good deed is what's most important. Second of all, because doing something for ulterior motives will lead to and will bring to doing it for the right motives. And third of all, because deep down beneath the surface, we already are doing it for the right reason. We already are doing it for the absolute good, positive reasons. It's just covered over with some layers, and we have a job to remove those layers. And that concludes today's discussion in Cultivating Character. I thank each of you for joining. I hope you found something relatable and relevant to your life in our discussion today. And if you have any questions, hit me up in the chat box. I look forward to continuing our discussion next week, same time, same place, 12:30 on Zoom for a half-hour discussion on Cultivating Character. Have a wonderful day.